We're looking here at I can't even say if it's the middle or the end, probably close to the end because of of a game of Shadows of Malice I'm playing. I was originally playing it, I put it out with 2 terrain hexes and immediately banded up my 2 characters and moved to this hex, and absolutely everything has happened here, so I almost feel like I'm only playing with 1 hex. I can't think of a game that I've spent as much time with that I have as many conflicted thoughts about, I guess is the way to put it, as I do this one. And this video is going to talk about my thoughts about this game. I'll give a teeny overview of what the game is, but the game's been out for a while. I'm playing the 2nd edition, which came out a couple of years ago now even. I think the original edition was from 2014 or 2015, and the 2nd edition with revised rules and some other changes came out in 2019. I'm also playing it with the Seekers of a Hidden Light expansion that brings in quests, which I think is an essential component to the game. It is one of games that I was made aware about by my viewers. A lot of people requested that I cover the game. I see why. It is attempting to be RPG-ish in a game box and to provide role-playing game experiences and elements and adventure story development in the way of playing a board game using board game components. And as you can see, the components have very limited visual appeal. There's very little art in the game in terms of drawing. This is a potion, for example. We do have some art here that is on the treasure cards. And indeed, the fact of the way that the artistic development of the game happened is so important to the game that in the rules right away, after listing the components, there is a discussion of the card art, and it says that it was originally designed to be a minimalist game with no artwork to enable players to imagine their own stories without visual anchors. In the end, the designer, decided to include images on the treasure cards and roughed out some placeholder art for test plays. Every playtest group asked me to keep the placeholder art for the final production. They found in it a nostalgic appeal. That's why the art on the treasure cards is rough and unrefined. I don't think that disclaimer wasn't needed. Maybe some others about the art, but I don't find that rough or unrefined. I think that it is perfectly charming, in fact, and indeed it is let's just take a look at this. Wasn't necessarily the order in which I was going to talk about it, but let's look at the art, because I think there's an interesting question here as to what enables the imagination, what inhibits the imagination, and there is a sense that is throughout the game that the idea of this game is to allow and to engender imaginative play. And this is done by keeping the artwork to a minimum. It is done by having, for example, the creatures that you're fighting be represented by variable attributes that you roll up on this table. They are given a terrain relevant description, like you might find an avian creature in the plains, for example. But you're not necessarily going to find an avian creature in other places. But back to the art. The question is whether or not having a visual aid is too directive, or it itself does engender creativity and ideas. I mean, so for example, this Thief Lord's cap. To me, seeing this and seeing this picture does not limit my concept of this to this picture, but actually it gives a feeling and some type of three-dimensionality to it, as opposed to, say, something that is a creature ability of agility with the stats here for what it means, and No, not even a picture of something running. Ditto for this bands of stone oak armor. I think the artwork really does add a lot, actually. So that's going to give you some clue as to the direction of my comments here. But as I said, there's so much I liked about this game. I haven't done a video, I think, yet where my feelings about something are still so, I keep going back and forth. So let's sit down at the table a little bit and talk about why I'm having trouble categorizing this game in my mind as a success, or what level of success, I guess, is the question. That's the question. So to start out, the concept of the game where you're living in a world, you're playing in a world that is haunted or threatened or tracked by the shadow world and the shadows that are coming to take over your world and to try to disperse the light, the good light and energy that you are trying to bolster, really does work. And I think partially the reason it works is because as you're playing, you're looking at something that visually suggests just that. So on the face of it, this aspect of the visual component of the game does reinforce the theme and does allow for your imagination to develop in that way. The variable creatures and the fact that you can encounter something by rolling up on this table to figure out what it is and what its abilities are, in theory works really well, because it could be anything at any time of any power and any ability to deliver wounds and any number of health on this table and any number of abilities based on your die roll. However, in practice, this can be difficult because, for example, in the game that we're looking at here, the very first encounter I had, it was I can't remember what the terrain was. It was a Arborian, it was a tree-like creature that was colossal. It only had the one ability, but that ability was colossal. Now, I could have run away from it, but I didn't want to. So what happened was, when we had just started out, we didn't have a lot of potions or weaponry or armor. We immediately encountered this colossal tree. It became prolonged, as the combat is in this game. And while on the one hand it felt epic, like I didn't want to just die right away, and we didn't, in fact, die right away, and then we struggled to take some turns to risk waiting it out and healing back up as the shadows grew stronger in the shadow realm. That story that I told in my mind that was happening, I think is in line with the intention of the designer to have a game of simple visual components with the philosophy that a visual component is leading you in a direction. And so that did work, I think, as intended. And the threat level of the shadow traveling around in the shadow realm getting stronger. And again, that's a visual thing that's, I think, extremely effective, because as the shadow travels around, it grows in health. So you see this increasing stack of health, and you know that at a certain point, it's going to descend on your world, and the longer it stays in the shadow realm, the more time you have to do things, but the stronger it's getting. And eventually, it's going to land on an open gate that will allow it to come into your world. That is excellent. That feeling of threat and the balance between your getting to do things in your world while the shadows aren't there, and then knowing that they're coming, is like a race even before you get to the race when it comes into your world. And the race when it comes into your world is that it's trying to uncover these shadow wells and overtake your world. So the fact that there is a feeling of threat and a growing feeling of threat throughout the game is extremely effectively done. And that has nothing to do with whether there's art or not art. That's a mechanic, a rules mechanic that really works in conjunction with the story that the game wants to tell. The problem is that there's another rules mechanic that's throughout the game that I think works against storytelling, and that is this D-star mechanic, which effectively is either adding or not one or more points or attributes or bonuses to something. So instead of getting a +1 automatically, you roll a d6, and if you get a 1, 2, or 3, then this equals a 0, so you don't get any plus. Or if you get a 4, 5, or 6, then you're going to get a +1. The idea of having variable stats on everything is a good one, but it is so, everything in this game practically comes with this fact that you need to roll to get these modifiers, and that again boil down to maybe a 0 or 1, or depending on how many of the dice you roll. I can't find one here, but you're going to be rolling more than one of them. There's no custom dice for this, which I think would have mitigated the feeling of just like you're already rolling a lot of dice, and then you have to remember, okay, 1, 2, 3 is 0, 4, 5, 6 is a 1, or however you're deciding to do it. That doesn't seem like a lot. But when you're doing it for everything, and you have different potions that you're using and different weapons that you're using, it just gets to be a lot. And that is where a mechanic of the game that is throughout the game, I think, really takes away from the desire of the game to involve you in your own narrative and to allow you to become lost in the world that you're creating. And while I love the idea of not being totally sure how well your armor is going to work that turn or how well your magic sword is going to work that turn, the more I played the game, the more I just kept wishing for something like this. These are custom dice from Descent and are just so simple and easy to roll and say, oh, I got 3. Oh, I got nothing. Now, I understand from the standpoint of production that's expensive to do custom dice. But from the standpoint of gameplay, from the standpoint of making your players work to do something in the game that in the end doesn't change that much about the narrative experience, I think this is where, for me, I just struggle, because I don't consider myself a lazy gamer at all. But I also don't want to feel that I'm doing too much work. So like just doing this, 0, fine. It doesn't really feel like work. But doing this, okay, I remember 1, 2, 3, that's a 0, nothing. It just, after a while, it got onerous. And I tried my best to engage with the rules the way the designer made them, and to understand that perhaps doing custom dice wasn't either in line philosophically with the design or financially with the design. But I think that was just a missed opportunity here to really lighten the load of what is already a pretty heavy, I don't like the word fiddly so much, but there is a lot to do in the game. There's a lot to remember in the game. And so much so that like I flagged the page with just even my basic actions and activities, because it was hard to sort of remember exactly what the options were. Although when it boils down to it, you're essentially rolling, moving, and deciding to have an encounter or not, or automatically having an encounter if you're in a lair. And that's what you're doing in the game. So I don't know. The different types of rolls per se were fine. The movement point actually I thought worked really well because it's not like just so easy as a roll and a move. So what you're doing is you're rolling 2d6 and you're taking the larger of the number that you get, and then you're also adding a number based on how many people are moving at the time. So if you're moving alone, this roll would give you 6 movement points. If you're moving with someone, you're rolling for each of the characters and you're taking the lowest value that each one got. So in this case, we both rolled a 5, meaning that we're moving at the same pace, so it's going to be 5. But for example, if this character's movement ultimately ended up being 4, we would have to move at the slow pace. That's cool. I like that. The other thing that's cool is if you roll doubles, you have to draw a fate card. And while some of the fate cards are good, a lot of them are not good. So if this happened, this character would have to draw this fate card, and this would be very, very bad. So I liked the risk factor in moving. Thematically, that works with the idea of an adventure. You're moving through a dangerous world, and there is a chance that something bad or maybe something good is going to happen to you. That was a simple enough rule to enact, and it went with the theme. It was in conjunction with the theme, and I thought it was a very good one, and it was a nice way of having the essentially roll and move, but not quite roll and move, enough that it felt like it was tied to the theme, because if you're moving in a group, you're going to only be able to move as fast as the slowest person in your group. One of my favorite adventure games, which is Runebound. And in Runebound, the story, the encounters, the narrative is fostered by cards that are basically like the opposite of what this character generator is doing, which is a picture, a story. It tells you everything about it, different stats on different cards, and you pull that in, and this is what you get. This is your spear of sparks. This is what it looks like. This is its health. This is what happens with it, the reward you get, and its stats. Ditto the Bandit King of Blackthorn. Now, is this the greatest piece of art? Absolutely not, at least in my opinion. I couldn't draw it, but I don't find it to be particularly involving. However, the fact that there is an ease of play by just turning over this card, I think allows, now this Lord of Corruption guy, I happen to like this art, but I think that it just allows me at least to kind of focus more on the individual encounter. Whereas here in this game, the encounter prep, I guess for lack of a better word, to get something that is different each time, I just don't think that mechanic is in service of story. I think that's what it boils down to. So I really admire the thought behind this game, and I do think that it offers a flexibility and a uniqueness that the majority of board games do not have. And the way that it's doing that is very novel, and the supporting materials for that story development, particularly in the Seekers of a Hidden Light expansion, where you get quests, and there's different types of quests that you get to do. So you can find and retrieve things, or you can hunt things. This, I think, adds a lot to the game and does foster. It gives you goals. It makes you feel like, okay, I'm going to risk trying to go to the forest, even though it's out of the way of what my bigger goal is, because I want to get these potions. I want to get these soul shards that are going to allow me to get more potions, mitigate die rolls, things of that nature. I want to get these special potions and runes. It does convey a feeling of desire on your part as a character. And that's a very, very sophisticated thing to do. And that's really, say, for example, not something, at least that I get out of the gameplay of a game like Runebound, which is much more simple. In Runebound, it's easier to just kind of buy into the card per se, and then move on to another card. But here, because of the design of it, it does allow for you to have this ongoing feeling, as I said earlier, of dread from the shadows coming in, of pressured decision making about, should I try to fulfill this personal quest I have to get things, or should we just continue on because we're in a fight against time, basically, to get to these light wells. That is a subtle and difficult thing to get to in a board game. And that is the kind of thing that tabletop role-playing games excel at, is making you have a feeling about your character. So in that way, it's incredibly successful. And it is, again, very unique in its ability to do that in a board game box. But really the question is, how do you get there, and what are the mechanics that support that type of feeling, and what might drain away from it? And that's where I think, for me, there are some that just take away from it, that kind of make me just not sure how I feel about the game, because I do love the fact that I feel what I feel in the game. But then I don't like the fact that I'm taken out of that feeling when I have to do this die rolling, and do the die rolling in a combat situation, no less, when things should feel like really dramatic and tense and be faster moving, I think, than they can be with this mechanic. So I'm really glad I played this game, and I understand why viewers wanted me to play it, and I recommend it to people who are RPG enthusiasts, who have the time to spend thinking about decision-making space in a game. The game is lengthy. It will take you probably about, if you play 2 characters solo, it took me it took me honestly a couple of hours per terrain card that I put down. You can decide how many you're going to put down. The combat, I think each combat is long. At least I found it to be that way. But for people who want that type of experience and can dedicate a couple of hours to gameplay, it would be very immersive if you just focused on the game. And again, for me, just try as much as possible to let go of the die rolling. It does come, I should say, with some chits that you can use in place of the die rolling. So you could decide either to put these in a draw bag and just pull them out, and that's a 0 and that's a 1. I tried that. It was like slightly better, but I eventually just went back to the dice, because it just felt like I could assemble them all in a one roll and just take care of it that way, but without having to then go to like another physical component. But it does offer these, or I suppose you could try to like flip these. I don't know. I wouldn't do that, but it does come with these to have a different way of coming up with that value. So at least for people who don't want to deal with the numbers and the die rolling, it does have that. So that is a look inside Shadows of Malice 2nd edition. It's a game that when I finish playing it, I'm thinking about it a lot, and thinking about what my characters did, what they experienced, and that is of course a very good thing.